Welcome to Sabby Sab's podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. My special guests today are presidential candidate Dr. Jill Stein and her running mate, Butch Ware. Welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Always great to be with you, Sabby.
Thanks for having us.
All right. So I have noticed that your campaign, Jill, you've been on the show a number of times, but I've noticed that your campaign is building a lot of momentum following the Breakfast Club interview. I have seen a number of videos on YouTube from channels I was not familiar with, out of the blue, talking about your interview. All of them have been on your side. And I've heard a number of Black voters say, I didn't even know that this campaign was, running for president. I wasn't familiar with the Green Party. Particularly, they are very excited about the fact that you do have a Black agenda, and they're starting to ask some questions. And some of those questions are, why doesn't the Democratic Party have this type of agenda? Why are they keeping this information from us? So it was very obvious to me watching the interview that it was clear. And this person says it here, Dimitri, I totally believe that the Democrats in the Breakfast Club used Angela Rye to set up Jill Stein, but it was an epic failure, mission not accomplished. And I think a lot of us remember this image here from Angela Rye with her arms closed. And what was interesting to me is that both of you were presenting one of the platforms, which is a Black agenda platform. And Angela Rye, in her position, because she is a Democrat strategist, was almost in a way advocating against that in order to get the audience to continue to support her friend, Kamala Harris. So it was very obvious to a lot of us that were watching. There were multiple interruptions, so I want to give both of you the opportunity to explain more about the Black agenda, such as reparations and criminal justice reform. And I want to start with Jill, and then I'll pivot to Butch.
So we have a broad agenda for reparations and the agenda to facilitate Black liberation. And the reason we have a broad agenda is because there's a lot that needs to be done. When the institution of slavery was finally ended, it didn't go away. It just sort of rolled over into lynchings, Jim Crow, segregation, the drug wars, redlining, the school to prison pipeline, et cetera. It just kind of continued on, health disparities, you name it. So we have an agenda to address all of that. So first and foremost are reparations, where we approach reparations as a debt owed. And it's not really negotiable. If someone has done work for you and sacrificed their life and their quality of life and all that, you owe them at the very least their back wages. So we think of reparations as kind of back wages for exploited, viciously exploited in the worst way possible labor. And the calculations for that is usually somewhere between, I think, 10 and 13 trillion dollars. And the predominant feeling is that that ought to be delivered as cash reparations. So that is kind of the going theory of our reparations program, with details to be worked out largely by the leadership of the African American community. That's kind of where that stands at the moment. I'll let you chime in a moment, Butch, but I'll just say a few other things to sort of scope out other aspects of this agenda. So, of course, healthcare and housing would be addressed as part of our, economic Bill of Rights, which is not specifically for Black liberation, but is certainly a critical need to the Black community. I just want to note that that's a part of the picture. We also, call for civil rights action and for the ability for private citizens to sue for violations of the mandates of the Civil Rights Act. And that's currently not possible, or it's very difficult. There's a high burden to do that. So this is just to ensure that race is not kind of swept under the table, like we're in this post-racial society that Barack Obama told us about, but that race is still very much an issue. You know, whether you look at disparities in education, income is off the charts. You know, in the Boston area, I don't know if you saw the study, Savvy, that was done. It was published in the Globe a couple of years ago, but things have not changed, put it that way, hardly. The average Caucasian family's net worth is about $250,000, whereas the average African-American net worth is all of $8. You know, and a lot of that has to do with housing and with student debt and other forms of debt, and just, you know, cumulative economic disadvantage and the lack of sort of what Caucasians have always had access to, which is to build family net worth and to pass it on across generations through housing. So, you know, all that's reflected in these staggering economic disparities. Likewise, in health, you know, the disparities are off the chart. As Martin Luther King said, of all forms of inequality, inequality in health is the most, I forget the word that he used, but it's like the most, you know, bitter or the most tragic. And there's something around like a 3-year difference in longevity and just lifespan. So being born Black, you pay basically a 3-year cut gets taken off of your lifespan. And in addition, if other conditions generally associated with being Black and brown, not having access to quality schools, not having access to the supports for school achievement, that adds, last I checked, another 10 years to the disparities in longevity. And so that's seen, for example, in, you know, sky-high maternal mortality, which is several times greater among African-American women than Caucasians. Asthma mortality in children is something like 400% higher in kids of color. So, you know, which is to say that there needs to be a lot of redress here. And, you know, it needs to, you know, there are many ways that this needs to be addressed. And so that's why race needs to be considered in virtually every form of public service, every institution that exists. It needs to be examined. Are there disparities here? And if so, how can we address them? And then, of course, policing and prison is a huge concern, and also the war on drugs. These are of huge concerns and take a huge toll. We know that if you're walking while Black or driving while Black, your odds of being approached, arrested, to have a violent encounter with police are approximately triple just for being African American, and that the rates of incarceration are far higher. And much of that has to do with the war on drugs and the fact that if you're Black and you've used, you know, any drug, you're much more likely to be paying a severe penalty for that than same offense if you're white. And rates of drug use are not different between Black and white communities, but rates of incarceration are vastly different. So, you know, what are the solutions? Just to say broadly, there are a number of pieces to the prison policing industrial complex that need to change. And I should mention here that includes ending the death penalty, which tends to be used against people of color. And this is such a tragic moment right now with the execution by the state of Marcellus Williams, just tragically, who was, by all evidence, an innocent man who was wrongly convicted and then wrongly executed. And how horrific is it that our elected officials, even while the lead prosecutor, the family of the victim, and others who were involved in the process all said this is an innocent man and he should not be executed, yet still the state went ahead. So it's just more reason why the death penalty needs to be abolished. And worth noting that the Democratic Party has basically removed its opposition to the death penalty in its current platform. you know, we call for an end to, you know, programs like 3 strikes, you're out, and what is it called? This mandatory minimum sentencing. Also, cash bail system, which basically means you're going to spend time in jail, maybe a long time in jail, just awaiting trial if you're poor. If you're poor. So there are just so many inequities that are built into the system. Not to mention, you know, the systematic deprivations and inequality and hopelessness and the school to prison pipeline and all that that get inflicted on the African American community. So policing in particular needs to be accountable to the community. Community should be in charge of police instead of police in charge of community. We call for federal oversight of all police violence cases because it's very hard to get justice at the local level where police are basically protected by the institutions and the courts around them. So those cases need to be kicked upstairs to federal oversight. And that policing itself needs to be changed, not only to put police under the watch and under the power of the community so that you have police review boards who do hiring, firing, have the power to subpoena and so on, so that the community is in charge of its police, not the other way around. And let's see, one other quick point I wanted to make. Oh, just that communities, you know, in the post-George Floyd era, there's been a lot of attention paid to, you know, defunding the police and how, you know, how is that done effectively? And what's emerging from the various experiments taking place at communities across the country are these basically diversion programs, that there's so much that's going into the police departments right now that they are not capable of handling. They don't know how to handle mental health cases, you know, conflict, drug use, et cetera, all kinds of things that should go to social workers, not to guys with guns, you know, who have a trigger finger, basically. And that's another piece of our program here, is ensuring that white supremacists are not going into police forces. This is a big problem, and that needs to be prohibited and rooted out. And then police programs should not be the sum total of community safety. Community safety can be served through other institutions, like having mental health workers and social workers basically also available on an emergency basis, so that stuff that's not you know, inherently violent or inherently dangerous is not going into the hands of police. So communities have been able to reduce the funding of their police programs and move those dollars instead to true social services. And last comment is that, you know, at the end of the day, we need justice, equality, and, you know, a real life available to young people, and, you know, youth programs and recreation programs and things of that nature, to prevent young people from kind of getting trapped into hopelessness and lives of crime, because there are no other alternatives and no other ways to make money, and not an economy that's available to them. So this has to be prevented at the get-go by having essentially just equitable communities that provide real resources, you know, starting with families with young infants, you know, and then on up, especially into youth programs, and then how policing is handled. So let me turn it over to you, Butch, to add to that.
Yeah, I was going to say, Butch, a lot of us are just being introduced to you, but I have to tell you, the feedback is that you've been on fire. I think a lot of people have seen your short videos that you have on Twitter as well, but people are seriously asking me, they're like, where has this been? Like, why haven't I heard this message from any of the other corporate politicians? But I do want to get your opinion too, in particular about criminal justice, because one of the things that you did mention on the Breakfast Club is that you mentioned that the Democratic Party, they're building cop cities. And I want to talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so it's an excellent segue, and your, you know, kind of journalistic instincts are right on point. So I'll walk through the door that you open, with a friendly amendment to your opening segment. I actually do think that Democrats do have a program for Black America. Their program for Black America is white supremacy. Their program for Black America is oppression. It is police violence. It is the carceral state. It is gaslighting. It is performative cosplay Blackness. It is cultivating long-term structures of dependency and incarceration. Their plan for Black America is having Black men pre-make biscuits for 15 cents an hour, on production lines in state and federal prisons, so that corporations that they work for can make a little money. There is a very, very clear program for Black America that is coming out of the Democrat Party, but it is not a program of liberation. It is a program of white supremacist oppression. And it's made all the more obscene by the fact that it is often accompanied by a cosplay Blackness, an appropriation of liberatory and emancipatory symbols from the Black radical tradition, and then the weaponization of those against our communities as tools, not just of justifying and enabling a genocide in Gaza, but justifying and enabling ongoing genocides in our own communities, right? I mentioned in a social media post today that under the Biden administration, coming out of the incredible popular mandate for fundamental police reform, defunding, and abolition that came after the Floyd uprisings, what you have gotten instead from the Democrats is increased police murders in every single year since George Floyd. What you've gotten instead of reduction of violent militarized police presence, you have the extension of the repressive techniques that have been used against Black communities now being extended to middle-class kids on college campuses through cop cities. You have a dramatic extension of the carceral state. And the thing is, I'll come back to the question of why y'all didn't hear me before this in a minute, but I know what that looks like. So I was stopped 17 times for driving while Black before I reached my 18th birthday. Okay. And in one of those incidents on 10th Avenue on the south side of Minneapolis, Dr. Jill, our friend Sean Young, Annie Young's son, Annie Young being the first ever elected Green Party official in the state of Minnesota. Sean Young, my best friend growing up on the south side of Minneapolis. Sean was with me that night, and he confirmed the details. He actually gave me the street address where it took place. An officer drew his service weapon on me and pointed it right at my face, then made me put my hands on the hood of the vehicle. That was probably the 13th or 14th traffic stop that had happened to me in a calendar year. And he almost ended my life that night. If he got a little more nervous than he already was, I would have been snuffed out on a street that was 2 blocks from where George Floyd would ultimately lose his life a couple decades later. And this vice presidential candidate you have in front of you does not exist at all. So I have direct experience with this carceral state and direct experience with the institutions of dependency cultivation that the Democrats lean upon. I'm gonna tell you another story from my other hometown. I was born in DC, raised in Minneapolis, but my father still lived in DC, and I would spend time with him usually during the summers, and I claim both places as hometowns. So when I would visit my half brothers, Victor and Michael, it was at a spot on the corner of Georgia and Morton in Northwest DC. And they used to call that block Lorton Morton. Lorton was a reference to the federal penitentiary in Virginia because it was just a back and forth from that block, Georgia and Morton, to Lorton Penitentiary. And when I would go visit my brothers there, at least 6 different times, I was almost shot, okay? At least 6 times. This was just during my freshman year in college when I was back in DC at George Washington University, and I would visit my dad and his wife Judy on Sundays. So this was one of the times when my dad, and we talk about a program for economic development, it's not an abstract thing for me to talk about poverty and homelessness. My father spent a good part of his life homeless. We spent a good part of my childhood homeless. I never lived at the same the same street address for a calendar year until I was 8 years old. But in one of these instances, when I'm visiting my dad, he's clean at this time, not using drugs, not drinking. Okay. And I'm going to visit my brothers, and my dad has all of his possessions in plastic bags in a closet in the back room at Judy's Place. And the reason is that they're doing spot checks to find out if there is a man in the household and removing welfare benefits if there is a male in that's living at the residence. So my dad, when he's clean and sober and trying to be there for his kids and getting his life together, has to have this humiliating experience from these dependency politics of theirs, right? So that he's literally living with his stuff in trash bags. So when I'm talking about like a program for Black liberation, it's a program for Black liberation that is like ingrained in my skin, written into my, you know, my personal physical memory, not just ancestral memory. And that brings me back to the first thing that you had said, which is, I mean, I get it, because I was never interested in publicizing anything. I was just trying to do the work. And for the last, 20 plus years, ever since I finished, my PhD, because listen, I was not doing a lot of activist and organizing work until I got that PhD, because my dad had a 6th grade education and too many people sacrificed for me to get that degree. So and getting a tenure track position at Northwestern University, getting $1.1 million in grant money from the Ford Foundation and the Mellon Foundation, like that is the realization of a lot of people's dreams. But individual excellence, Black faces in high places doesn't save us. So I immediately got to work taking those resources and using them for community organizing, community teaching, not just here, by the way, but like running multi-year international research programs that connected Africa and the diaspora, like Black liberation through and through in the grandest sense. And I wasn't about publicizing those things. I was about doing the work. And it's similar to what people say sometimes about Dr. Jill. Oh, how come we don't hear about the Green Party except every 4 years with their little sorry tired, routine tap dance routine that they do? Well, those of us that are actually about living and embodying this work are much more concerned with doing the work than with publicizing it. And I'll leave it at that.
Very well said. And this video here, I want to show this clip here from the Breakfast Club, where you tried to explain to them that these parties are not as different as they think that they are.
Team Red might be speeding us towards a kind of societal collapse, right? And fascism. Exactly. But, right. No. But the thing is that the truth of the matter is that imperialism and fascism are two sides of the same coin. One is the side that faces outwards, and the other is the side that faces inward. And I made a social media post before I got brought onto the team that said it this way, is that whether you vote Team Red or Team Blue, militarized fascism wins. Because the AIPAC and the weapons manufacturers are patrons of both networks. And just to return to that point, right, I've been on campuses. I organized a Palestinian liberation concert on October 21st. I organized a Black and Palestinian solidarity panel at my local mosque on October 11th, 4 days after. Wow. Like, your brother was not backing down. And the Zionists came for my job within the month, okay? And, a Negro is still standing. So, but the point of all that is just to say that when we launched this campaign to try to actually bring people into this conversation, you see that this is actually where the American people stand. The American people do not want this forever war, and they do not want militarized fascists coming to their campuses to crack kids' heads open. I had to stand out in front of the encampment, and that's Democratic governor in California. That's Democrat, mayors in places like New York City. It's Democrats that are running cop cities. So the thing is, bro, fascism is already here. It's just that one of it is like fascism, and the other is fascism. But the truth is that the purple fascists, the purple imperialists, Team Red and Team Blue, are run by the same funders, and who funds you runs you. So there's a discourse about putting off fascism, but the reality is that fascism was already here, because we already can't speak freely. We already have people, university presidents, losing their job under democratic regimes. We already have kids that are lining up for peaceful protests, having their heads knocked open, or you have the cops standing to the side at UCLA so the thugs can knock kids' heads open. So I'm sorry, the fear mongering ain't gonna work on me.
So I think that particular clip there really took off, and I think it gained the attention of a lot of people. There have been a number of the ADOS activists that saw that clip and actually saw the whole interview, and they were like, wait a minute, we should be looking at the Green Party. Like, we've been asking the Democratic Party to make the connection. And I believe these Democrat politicians, they know this, but this is not what they're paid to do. They're not paid to tell you what Butch said there on the Breakfast Club. And it brings up this other point. How do you respond? We'll pivot back to Jill. How do you respond to people when they say that you're a spoiler because you are going to help Donald Trump, or they said that RFK at one point, they said that he was hurting Donald Trump? How do you respond to that? Because I've always told people, I said, well, if these third party candidates weren't in the race, I just wouldn't vote for the Democrat or the Republican, but I would vote for the ballot measures that are going to be on the ballot for my state. How do you respond to that, Jill?
In many ways, you know, I try to point out to people that this is basically a propaganda of powerlessness that's intended to tell you that you have no power, you also have no agency, and you have no vote. You know, your vote is dictated by the marching orders from, you know, whoever owns your vote. You know, most of the time it's Democrats who are saying they own your vote. I don't hear this very much from the Republicans. They assault our democracy in other ways, you know, but it's Democrats who are saying that you have to vote for them, and that they own your vote. They don't have to earn your vote. So, you know, I just tried to point out the obvious to people that this is propaganda. You know, this is Kool-Aid. Don't drink it, because it's intended to make you small and to keep you trapped. You know, how are things working out for you under this great system run by these two parties and the Democrats, who've often had all three, you know, the two chambers of Congress and the White House, like when they bailed out Wall Street, you know, with the meltdown of the mortgage system. It was 7 or 8 million families who got thrown out while the bankers got bailed out. You know, it's not working for working people. And the Democrats are very busy trying to change the subject from how they have failed you to the fact that you owe them your vote. You don't owe them your vote. Your vote is your own, and it's up to us, you know, and your vote is your power in a democracy. If you don't use that power, then you've basically given it up, and that's not working for us. So if we're going to have a hope here, if we're going to have a fighting chance for jobs that pay, you know, the wage you deserve, it ought to be a $25 an hour minimum wage, not that 15, well, what is it now? 6 something an hour. You know, the Democrats promised they were going to raise it to 15, but they wouldn't even vote on that. You know, they wouldn't vote on Medicare for all. They wouldn't, you know, bring it to the floor. They wouldn't support a public option. They wouldn't support bulk purchasing of pharmaceuticals. They're failing, you know, they're failing madly, and they really don't want any competitors out there that are going to hold them accountable. So this is all just a kind of a shell game to change the subject and prevent voters from actually having a choice and, you know, from being informed. And my cat is saying hello. Taking possession because I'm home for a day, you know. So he's like
enjoy it while it lasts.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, so I really encourage people to pay no attention to that guy behind a curtain. You know, pay no attention.
Wizard of Oz reference. I love it. Thank you for that. Yes, because you know. He is actually not in charge. You know, he is just a, you know, he's a blown up image that's actually quite powerless. Yep. And, you know, as Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. We have to make that demand. If we don't make the demand, it ain't going to happen. There's not even a fighting chance for it, for reparations or for healthcare as a human right or a living wage or rent control so you can, you know, afford to keep a roof over your head. It's not going to happen unless you make a demand. And if you're just voting for the lesser evil, whoever you think that is, as opposed to someone who actually represents you, then your support for those issues, there is no record of it. It's been disappeared. It doesn't exist. So that's half of the you know, solution in my mind. The other half is Alice Walker's quote that the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. We actually have that power. We have the numbers. You know, it's 68% of Americans who want to end this genocide right now. They want a diplomatic solution. They want a ceasefire, and it's almost as many that want to have a
weapons embargo right now. You know, there are the numbers. We have the values. We have the solutions. What we don't have is the courage of our convictions, because we're forever being told that we're powerless. We're not powerless. We are powerful the moment we stand up with the courage of our convictions. Courage is contagious, and we're in this amazing, you know, tragic and powerful moment right now, you know, in the cauldron of a genocide, you know, observing up close and personal. There's several genocides, but there's one that we're paying for every bit. There's one that we're arming, and we see it on our computer screens every day, and looking in the face who we are. This is who we are. If you vote for it, you have affirmed it. You have validated it. You have enabled it. Don't vote for it. Don't be talked out of your humanity. Stand up and reject that version of who we are. You know, we need a version of the, you know, Martin Luther King's beloved community. That's who we can be. That's who we are to each other. If you remove the empire and the oligarchy and the fascism that are all kind of bound up in each other, we can say no to that. We have the power to do that. We have the numbers, and we have another way forward. So that's what I try to convey to people when they tell me that, oh, there is no, you know, there's no choice. We have to roll over and vote for genocide.
Dr. Jill, can I jump in with one kind of particular point? Is I think I think that I started to mention this when we were driving up from Orange County to Santa Barbara. Was that day before yesterday? But I never got this point. Yeah, I know they all run together. But I never got this point quite out. Is that there's actually something that's deeply racist and insidious in the spoiler argument, because the ownership vote is a demographic ownership. Okay, that's what they're saying. They're saying we get 90% of the black vote, and if you mess with our 90% of the black vote, you are taking our votes. Negroes, we own your vote. People of color, we own your vote. Your default position, person of color, is my property. Deeply racist, white supremacist argument. It's the unspoken part about it, is that the claim, the reason why you hear that claim from Democrats and you don't hear it from Republicans is because it's a racial proprietary claim based on the way that they read demography as electoral outcome.
Very well said there, Butch. And I think that's spot on. And more people need to hear that, as if we owe them. And I always say this to my audience: I don't owe them anything. Votes do have to be earned. And speaking of the genocide, we have been watching, some of us were talking about this before October 7th, about the occupation in Gaza. But since October 7th, we have watched Israel kill I'm going to say hundreds of thousands of people, because they've frozen that number at 40,000, which mathematically that doesn't add up when you look at the number of the bombs that have been dropped. Genocide happening in Gaza. We are seeing Israel have a land expansion in the West Bank, the biggest one that I've heard of so far. And now Israel has killed hundreds in Lebanon. So it is very clear to me that activist Miko Polite was correct when he told me last year that Israel would try to find a way to expand this conflict. One of the things I think that makes the Democratic Party very concerned about your particular campaign is that you are correct on this issue. And not only are you correct on this issue, but looking at the polls that I showed on this show, it is very clear that there is a certain, segment of the Muslim voting community that has decided to support your campaign. And that is in the swing states where I've shown people those numbers. And I think if you listen to corporate media, they would have you convinced that Kamala's got this in the bag. That is not what I have seen.
She's dead. She can't win. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
I want to hear a little bit more about maybe some of the internal polls that you've seen, if you can discuss it. And then also, what would you do if you were in the White House day one? What would you do to end the genocide that is happening in the Middle East? And I'll go to you, Butch.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll leave the second part of the question for Dr. Jill, because all I'm going to do when Dr. Jill is in the White House is report for duty, you know, like this, and you know, we come on down, like, you know, tell me where to go, and I'll serve. So I'll go to the polling questions, right? Because as somebody that has been doing, you know, education, activism, organizing, like I literally in community education courses just since the Floyd uprisings have taught over 3,500 people in private community education courses. You know, so these are my folk. People forget, by the way, that the largest ethnic contingent in the American Muslim community is still Black Muslims, right? Imam Marcellus Khalifa Williams is not an unusual, you know, kind of demographic person. The racial ideology of the Democrats always puts Arabs as the face of Islam, but the truth is that the biggest ethnic contingent in the American Muslim community is still Black Muslims. But I've got long, deep relationships with all of these communities: South Asian community, Arab community, white convert community, Malaysian, Indonesian. I've done work in all of these communities, taught in all these communities. So just to be clear, the Muslim vote has been completely lost by the Democratic Party, and it is not coming back. So Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, as soon as I got on the team, took a meeting with Dalia Mugahed, who's done polling in the Muslim community for the last 10 years. She's now senior researcher, and she showed me the numbers. Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, 3 swing states, which are essentially demographically, for the purposes of the African-American percentage of the population and the Muslim percentage of the population, they're the same state, okay, demographically. And in those 3 states together, 65% of the Muslims voted for Joe Biden in 2020. Joe Biden was polling at 12% in January 2024. They were dead. And I learned that on my first day on the campaign about a month ago. Well, if I knew that a month ago, they certainly knew that at that polling in January of 2024. They have known for 8 months that they cannot win any of the swing states that they need in order to win. They can't win them because they needed heavy majorities amongst the Muslim population just to carry those places. And that's why they've gone so heavy on the racial rhetoric and trying to get Black numbers up, because they are trying to compensate for the wholesale exodus of Muslims from their voting bloc. And they seem ignorant of the fact that every time you raise every time you talk to the Black community, you're also talking to the Black Muslim community. And that Black Muslim community is not coming along with this genocide no matter what. So that was January 2024. Now, fast forward, right? We saw CARE run a poll early in the process, where a national poll where first Jill and Kamala were polling at 29%, neck and neck. I'd been on the campaign for maybe a week when this came out. Then Wisconsin and Arizona, swing states, and a third one that I'm forgetting. Now Jill is running ahead of Kamala. Well, Yaqeen Institute, good friends of mine, people that I know, I've seen their new polls that have not yet come out. They're going to come out this week. 53% of the Muslims are now going third party, with 80% of them coming to us now. Okay. 15% for Kamala, 4% for Trump. Okay. So this narrative that we are taking votes away from the Democrats and giving them to Trump, it is an effort to do 2 things. They're gaslighting us, one, but they're also scapegoating us. They want to blame the Muslims when they lose the election, because they've already lost the election. They cannot win the election. There is no path to victory for the Democrats. The polls that they're giving you, whatever they're telling you, they all know this. And that's the reason why they had Aosi Pelosi come after us, attacking us. That's the reason why they had Kunta Keith Ellison. Literally, the week after he came up to me at Friday prayer on the north side of Minneapolis and wanted to, like, embrace me man to man, black man to black man, Muslim to Muslim, then he's told by his Democrat handlers that he's got to put out a hit on Jill. So Massa say jump, Keith say how high, boss? How high you want me to jump? And so that's why they're doing it, because they already know that they have no path to victory. And they tried to use Uncommitted. Many good people joined Uncommitted, trying to get the Democrats to respond in a principled way. But the leadership of Uncommitted is bought and paid for. They were trying to keep those voters from going to third party, and that exodus happened anyway. So they're finished. They're non-competitive. I've already told the team internally, I'm going for the Trump voters. The Democrats are already finished. As for what Jill would do on day one, I'm gonna let Jill answer that.
You ready for that, Savvy? Did you want to say something before I jump in?
I was just going to say, this is why it's important for people to know about those internal polls. And I was telling my audience, I said, if you paid attention to the polls that corporate media is showing you and I show you on the show, notice they're not showing you about other demographics that are voting third party. They keep talking about Black men. How can we get Black men and yada, yada. And I'm like, notice they're not talking about the other group. This is really important. Now, I've never seen third parties based on the poll that I just saw. I've never seen third parties polling the way that they are now, right. As long as I can remember.
And young people and independents also, by the way, not just Muslims. So sorry, go ahead, Dr. Jill, pardon me.
Yeah, so I'm asked all the time by the press, at least twice today, so how do you feel about taking votes away from, from Kamala Harris and ensuring Trump's victory? And I say, well, democracy is about competition. We're supposed to compete for votes. And I say, this is in the Democrats' hands. They could win those votes back right now if they do the weapons embargo. They could do it. But unfortunately, they care more about conducting genocide than they do about winning the election. This is in their hands. They can't blame it on anybody else. This is their decision to let that demographic go. So that's what you get. Now, what we will do, because remember, 1 out of every 3 eligible voters chose not to vote in 2020. 1 out of every 3 eligible voters is enough to win a 3-way race. So don't, don't let your enemy tell you how numerous you are. I heard quoting
that's Malcolm. Never let your enemy.
We don't need the Democratic Party to tell us how we, how powerful we are or aren't. It's not up to them. It's what we do. And we can, we can end the genocide on day one. And we talk about this a lot because the Democrats should be held accountable to this. When Joe Biden says, oh, it's just too hard, I'm working day and night, but I just can't get I can't get Israel to comply. They're out of control. That's such total BS. Ronald Reagan, the famous peace advocate, Ronald Reagan, he basically ended Israel's war on Lebanon. This was in 1982, I think, where Israel had gone into Lebanon to pursue the PLO, the Hamas of its day, and was massacring people by the thousands. And even peace advocate Ronald Reagan, couldn't stand it and basically picked up the phone and called Menachem Begin and reminded him that, he's on a leash. He's really a proxy for the U.S. empire who provides his financing, his weapons, his diplomatic cover, his intelligence, etc. So Reagan said that, and within 24 hours, the bombing and the missile strikes were over and the Israeli army departed. So this is not rocket science. This is not some really complicated thing. This is about simply doing the right thing and not being a, kind of an empire that's looking to control the oil supply, as Ronald Reagan's Secretary of Defense, Caspar Weinberger, said. Israel is the unsinkable battleship for the U.S. in the Middle East. The U.S. has a policy of full spectrum dominance, which means we dominate militarily and we dominate economically, and that means we have to control major energy and other resource supplies. So that's what we're doing, and Israel serves that purpose, but it's not sustainable. We think that we are the king of the castle right now as the U.S. empire, but we are no longer. It's now a multipolar world. We're not in charge economically. We are not the economic powerhouse. The BRICS alliance has more economic power than the U.S. and its NATO partners. So, power has shifted. We have to shift too. And we need to shift into a multipolar world because empires will always abuse power. And it's just not a healthy way to have a world. So we all need to grow up, and we need people in power who are capable of being adults in the room as we move from a dying empire to what comes next. You know, what comes next needs to be a world we can live in, because we're currently not on that track whatsoever. We're on the verge of nuclear war on at least 3 fronts right now around the world. So we can do a much better job. How we end the genocide, number one, is pick up the phone. And if Israel says, well, tough cookies, we're not going to do that, we're going to keep on this war, hello, it's weapons embargo. In fact, it needs to be weapons embargo until Israel is fully on board with the resolutions of the International Court of Justice. We need to apply international law here. We can't be making this up on the fly and letting conflicts kind of go to hell in a handbasket. It's a complicated world right now. We need to peel back on nuclear weapons. That goes without saying. But in addition to getting rid of nuclear weapons, we need a basis for, for conflict resolution, for rules of the game, for having international relations based on diplomacy, human rights, and international law, not just the raw exercise of power. So weapons embargo to Israel, and Israel needs to not only stop the genocide, pull back from Lebanon, which is the makings of an extension of this genocidal war, which could go much bigger because of the multi-alliances in the Middle East. This is like the prelude to the First World War. You know, that disaster that could just go up like a tinderbox with, when the match gets struck. So we've got to pull back from Lebanon, and then Israel needs to comply with all the dictates of the ICJ, which means an end to the occupation, an end to ethnic cleansing, and an end to the apartheid form of government. So a lot of the details have to be worked out, but the basic framework is there. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. We know exactly what needs to be done.
That's right.
Now, there was some pushback on the Middle East with a recent statement that the campaign, this was after the Mehdi Hasan interview, which, again, Mehdi Hasan is another Democrat attack dog. He blocked me. He blocked me.
That is such a mark of distinction for you, Savvy. That is like,
Yeah, you count, Savvy.
Yeah.
He blocked me. He blocked me because I said, well, I think the point is that you don't reward genocide. I got blocked for that. So I don't know. But I think, there was some pushback about a statement that you made after that on Twitter, where you mentioned different names of people that you would consider to be war criminal. And there was some pushback with the names of Vladimir Putin and also Assad. I'm not the best. I'll be honest, I'm not the best on Syria. But I've had Aaron Mate on the show before to talk about the OPCW whistleblower report. And I'm also familiar with Vanessa Beeley, who she's a journalist that was there during that time. And I don't know if you have changed your mind about that or not, or if you would be interested in hearing Aaron Mate or Vanessa Beeley, their perspective, particularly around Syria.
So let me say that I really appreciate their perspective. And I tried to actually incorporate their perspective and to affirm that our perspective is basically, principles of, peace, justice, diplomacy, and acknowledging that human rights is also part of that picture. And we've often been accused of not recognizing the human rights abuses. And, I was trying to acknowledge that there are human rights abuses here going on. And you can quibble about what's a human rights abuse, what's a war crime. Mm-hmm. And I think that's not a useful trap to get stuck in, actually. And, the point that I was really trying to make was to recognize that there are real human rights struggles in all of this, because I'm forever being accused of being a Putin puppet and an Assad, kissing up to all the dictators around the world because I oppose U.S. imperialism. Therefore, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And the reason I could not talk to Mehdi Hasan was because he wanted you know, he wanted it black and white, one way or the other. Unfortunately, it's quite nuanced. And for us and myself, U.S. empire has always been kind of the foundation of what's wrong. And what Aaron talks about is how that U.S. empire then provokes and abuses other governments. And Aaron has made a very strong case. And the case that he's made about some of the use of chemical weapons, that it doesn't, you know, there's something really funny with the story that attributes all of this to Assad. Well, we know from Project Sycamore, Sycamore, I forget what it, you know, exactly the name of it, but this was the CIA project that put $1 billion a year into regime change in Syria and into supporting ISIS. John Kerry himself said, ISIS is our ally, you know, in Syria. So there were forces at work that severely destabilized Syria and that provoked a really defensive, violent response from Assad. We're doing the same thing, you know, to Russia by having provoked Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And I've always said that invasion is illegal, it's murderous, you know, it's horrific. But on the other hand, it was provoked. It was provoked for decades by the US and NATO. And so our point of view doesn't neatly sort into it's all one or all the other, but rather these are complex things.
It was kind of clear that Mehdi was not going to give you the opportunity to give that type of response. That's what I was curious about.
Yes.
I was like, yeah.
And the other point that I think our partners are trying to make here is that, and this is why I generally don't use those terms, war criminals. I don't use that. I will call actions criminal, but I usually don't call people war criminals. And the reason for that is that we have an explosive and very dangerous situation, and we need to be able to conduct diplomacy here, especially with Russia. But all of the Middle East is going up in flames right now. So we need to be able to talk to people. We need to be able to sit down and have diplomacy. And when you're using terms that, you know, to call someone a war criminal implies that they're, you know, they are subject to arrest, essentially. And, you know, it just creates sort of more inflammatory situation in which dialogue is really difficult. And I tried to integrate that into the statement, but the statement was put out somewhat hurriedly in the wake of that Mehdi Hasan, you know.
Ambush?
Ambush, thank you. Yeah. But I have to say, most of our partners, I think, know that, at least they know now, that it's not like we suddenly, you know, have gone over to the dark side, you know, and that we're changing our tune. Our foreign policy, you know, is essentially unchanged, except that I'm a little more careful to acknowledge that there are a lot of human rights abuses going on, which are sort of the, you know, the people that are caught in the crossfire of empire, its provocations, and then the fight back from those that we have provoked. So we've got a lot of messy situations in which there's no way out. And this was not intended to say that they're good guys, bad guys, and we've got to arrest those war criminals, but rather that there's a lot of criminality to go around. There's a lot of human rights abuses, and we got to pull back. Everybody's got to cool their jets, and we got to be able to sit down and have diplomacy and stop this kind of this regime change provocations that then brings down these incredible human rights abuses and all the suffering of the Syrian people, people of Iraq, the people of Ukraine, you know, who are being bled down to the last Ukrainian so that the US could bleed down Russia. You know, it's just such a hornet's nest. We have to just cool our jets and understand that diplomacy is the way out here.
Jill, and you, if I could just jump in, you paraphrased or channeled me on Malcolm. So now I'm going to channel you on King, right? And I'll probably butcher the quote, but my country is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, right? And that's the relevant context.
That is the context.
There is no comparison of the scale of violence of the American imperium to any other scale of violence. And that doesn't mean that the actions of other, people that brutalize their own populations or other people's populations aren't criminal. It just means that there's a context in which, that always has to be foregrounded, that there is a single primary driving force behind all imperialist brutality in the world today, and it is the United States of America. And in point of fact, there has never been a more extensive, violent, powerful, brutal imperial state in human history, because the capacities for surveillance and death dealing that the United States of America now holds as something that is completely unprecedented in human history. So it's within that backdrop that everything else unfolds, and without that as relevant context, nothing else makes sense. And I'll just say, yeah, go ahead, Jill, please.
Yeah, if I can just add to that thought before you
no, you're good.
Down another track. There's this saying that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And empires are centers of absolute power, absolute or getting, close to it, but they're centers of extraordinary power. So they tend to be extremely violent and abusive. And to Butch's point, we're at a point now where technology and surveillance has enabled the empire of the moment that's in possession of that technology to be far more violent and intrusive than any others. It's not that it's inherently more evil. It's just that that's the nature of empire, and empire has way more tools for conducting its, its corrupt domination and its violence. And that's going to keep going, which is why we have to change course here. We can't simply replace one empire with the next. It's over. It's curtains. We're headed for the mushroom cloud right now on several fronts. And so we need the adults in the room to stand up and say, we're not buying this. We're not just going down this trajectory that is making a beeline for oblivion. We need a different way forward based on international law, human rights, and diplomacy. It's kind of uncharted territory. How do we do this? How do we resolve conflicts? But we have to, tap into our deeper humanity and find the way forward, because, in the words of, who is it? There is no alternative. The woman who was the prime minister of the UK, very conservative. She always used to say, there is no alternative, meaning capitalism, but that's not it. There is no alternative to finding a better world, a more just world, because the world that we've got right now is kind of caving in on all of us. It's going to take us all down. So we have a very good incentive right now to, to be moving in a more just and peaceful direction, even though all the questions are not answered. We've got to figure a lot of this out as we go.
Okay, I have one more for both you guys, because I know Butch does have to run pretty quickly. Dr. Cornel West said that Kamala Harris's campaign had reached out to him and tried to offer him something. Did that happen did they reach out to you? Because I'm kind of wondering, I'm like, people reached out to RFK, and I'm like, did they reach out?
I didn't hear that. That's hilarious.
Yeah, it was in an interview.
He declined. They were offering him jobs and, apparently some perks, and he said, hell no.
Yeah, he declined. And I'm curious, did they reach out to you and try to offer you anything? And then to go along with that question, you have been collaborating with Kshama Sawant, who's really big on labor, former Seattle city councilor. She's really done a really great job there in Seattle, and you guys have been collaborating together. Kshama said that this is going to become a bigger project. It's not just about November. So I want to hear a little bit about that as well.
So, Jill, if I could just answer the first question, and then I have to log off, unfortunately, and I'll let you guys wrap up the conversation. There is a tradition in it. So, first of all, the answer to the question is no. I personally have not been approached by Kamala people. I think that they would probably know better than that. And if they were to offer whatever they would offer, My response as a Black Muslim man would be the response of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when they tried to buy him off of his liberating mission. What he said was, if you put the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left, I would not desist. So that's what they're most afraid of, is that they're most afraid of the fact that this is an incorruptible movement. And everything that they do is based on corruption. And when the American people get the chance to see this kind of morally incorruptible leadership, the choice becomes easy for them. So with that, I'm going to mic drop and run out of the room because I'm late for another important commitment. But thank you so much, Sabby, for the time. And Dr. Jill, I know I'm leaving things in the most capable hands to close out this, this engagement. Okay, so more soon.
Good to see you again.
Thanks, Butch. Yeah, so to you, Jill, collaborating with Kshama Sawant, and what are the plans after November?
Yeah, sure. And, you know, echoing to Butch, although he and I have never talked about this, but I've never been approached. I was sort of approached way back when I was running for state rep in like 2006, something like that. And the rep in the adjacent district basically said that he would support me if I would run as a Democrat. And I said, hell no. You know, the Democrats are the problem here. I'm not running to be one of them. I'm running to replace them and retire them. And so, you know, the Democrats have never recognized my existence in any way except to like try to smear me and, you know, criminalize me and stuff like that. So I don't expect they're gonna try anytime soon to buy me off. And then with Kshama, yeah, it's been really great because we've sort of been in a similar orbit for many years, and that orbit has just sort of like shifted to where her team and our movements are very much in the same place. And we complement each other's work really well because she's doing such great stuff with labor. In fact, you know, we were both in Seattle. Well, she's in Seattle, and our team went there to visit to support the Boeing machinist strike. And it was so exciting because Workers Strike Back has been working with them, and they are absolutely unapologetic, and they're supporting our campaign. And to have a group of, you know, it's not like their whole union is, but a lot of the striking workers that Kshama's working with as part of Workers Strike Back, they are really supporting our campaign. And to hear people in labor who are really bucking the Democratic Party and the whole system is so exciting. You know, it's like recently we saw the Teamsters, you know, decline to endorse anyone. And I'm thinking, well, you need to look beyond just those two options. You know, why don't you go beyond that? And what Kshama's doing is working with breakaway labor that's actually ready to start doing that, which I think is so exciting. And the Greens have never quite had the critical mass in labor to make that a really going concern. So we are going to be doing a number of events together. I think we're going to be back in Seattle in the middle of October doing events together and planning for a conference after the election. So you'll hear more about it. But, you know, for quite a while, Greens have really tried to bring together a broader coalition and to work in solidarity with other non-corporate independent third parties, true alternative parties, not like the corporate sponsored RFK type parties and things like that. So we actually had a thing that was called Left Elect that included many of the parties of the left before the Sanders campaign. This was in early, I think it was in 2015, we were working on this. And then the Sanders campaign got launched, which totally decimated the ranks of Left Elect because everybody went flocking into the, not the Greens, but most others went flocking into the Sanders campaign. So we've been looking to get something like that started up again, to have all these independent parties working together like was done in France. What happened in France, the parties of the left got together and actually beat back the right wing, you know, in this right wing extremism. There have been other problems implementing that because of the resistance of Macron to actually acting on the voters' mandate. But in terms of capturing the vote, it's a strong left agenda, which is the alternative to right-wing extremism, you know, which is an outgrowth of the neoliberal agenda that's been throwing working people under the bus for decades. That's the driver of extremism. And, you know, we remind people that the Democrats are not the solution to Trumpism. They're actually the cause of Trumpism. So, you know, don't use that excuse, or don't let that be used as an excuse against you to stand up and actually vote for our campaign in this race. Don't worry that, oh, you're giving it away to Trump and that Trump is the danger. No, both parties are the danger. And the Democrats will keep throwing working people under the bus and forcing people into greater extremes of the right wing. So at any rate, we're looking to bring back that kind of left solidarity and grow our ranks so that we're acting together in a strategic way so that we, you know, can really change our direction forward and really pull out all the stops to build our power.
Awesome. Dr. Jill Stein, thank you. And Butch Ware, so much.
Our pleasure. Really great talking with you always, Abby. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye-bye.